Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this press conference, which has been given by the Chairman and the Rapporteur of the Temporary Committee on the Echelon Interception System. I would ask you all, when you ask your questions, please to indicate your name and the newspaper or media for which you work. I give the floor to Mr. Coelho, who's the Chairman of the Committee.
Muito obrigado. Queria dizer-vos que estou muito contente.
First of all,
E com a circunstância.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, that I'm very pleased with the final decision which we have taken on this. Just a few minutes ago, the Parliament adopted the recommendation which we made in the Temporary Committee, and that was with more than two-thirds majority now. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Gerhard Schmidt for the excellent work which he's done as chair of the committee and as rapporteur. I've just said that in the plenary session. I'd like to reiterate that here as well. It was actually quite easy for me to chair the committee, given that we had such an excellent rapporteur. Furthermore, I'd like to remind you that there were 4 points that were mentioned to us again and again when we were first set up. First of all, there were concerns that we would not be able to comply with our mandate, that we wouldn't be a temporary committee, but rather would go on and on ad infinitum, so that at the end of the year we wouldn't manage to conclude our work. However, I proved that the people who said that were not quite correct, and we managed to fulfil the mandate which the European Parliament gave us. Furthermore, there was the question of whether we should be a temporary committee or a committee of inquiry. A committee of inquiry is somewhat limited in what it is authorised to do. It can only deal with issues which affect contraventions of community law. The temporary committee was selected as a committee form in order to be able to go far beyond what is just contraventions of community law. We wouldn't have been able to look at all of the different spheres we looked at if we had been a committee of inquiry. Furthermore, there were those who said that we would not be able to come up with any conclusions, that we would be avoiding the issue, that we wouldn't be able to obtain sound evidence, and so on and so forth. Now, if there's one thing that we can say by way of conclusion at the end of our work, we can say very clearly that Echelon does exist. And the European Commission agreed with this assessment. Furthermore, the last forecast for our work was that probably we would be able to come up with an interesting analysis, but one which we couldn't draw any conclusions from. You'll remember the criticism. I'm sure you remember that people said that at the first press conference on the topic we held here, and those people were quite right too. We've done serious work, we've been very rigorous in our approach, and we have come up with 44 recommendations which were the object of the vote which we just took. So that means, ladies and gentlemen, that I have the following message to put you. We've done serious work, sound work. We've fulfilled our mandate. And I think that we have done good work, particularly Gerhard Schmidt, our rapporteur.
Meine Damen und Herren, dem ist wenig hinzuzufügen. Ich bedanke mich.
ladies and gentlemen, there's very little to add. I'd like to thank you for your kind words, and I can agree that it was very simple to work and very straightforward to work in this committee chaired by Mr. Coelho. If you have read the report or if you have been following the discussion, you will be aware of the fact that we don't believe that Echelon exists, but we can prove it. There's plenty of evidence you can do it in two ways. The one who is doing something can admit that he's doing something. Intelligence services or secret services don't normally do that. But then, secondly, you can have a method that's used by courts and approved, that's circumstantial evidence. And here you have the circumstantial evidence that in fact would be able to stand up in court. And we don't believe it. We know that there is a system which operates on a global basis, and part, I stress, part of the system is used intercontinentally and is using cables, and there's a filter in the system, and it is searched on the basis of certain keys in order to establish information that is of interest to a particular intelligence service. We know that the United States of America, in certain cases, when we are talking about huge international contracts, telephone network or airports and so on, we know that the United States, in fact, listen to business conversations and information in detail. They do that because they bribe Europeans. We must defend ourselves there, but we're not giving this information, is not being passed on to companies. They say we can believe that or not. But what is decisive that is that if a company is aware of the fact that its discussions are being listened to, then they will, because otherwise they don't know the consequences. We have developed certain recommendations. Mr. Coelho has mentioned that. If you're interested, go into the report and read it. But let's discuss the three main political problems as far as I can see them. We should see that in the context of these listening systems or surveillance systems. First of all, the problem is that we have established through our investigations that when you're talking about intelligence services in the European countries and in other cases, there's a very different culture with respect to controlling these services. There are very exhaustive systems. In Germany, we have a dual control, a parliamentary one, and then where we have to approve listening and surveillance, and then we have mixed systems such as in the UK, and then we have intelligence services which are not being controlled at all as far as we can see. And whatever you do, then you are certainly interfering in the private spheres. You can only intercept information if you are trying to protect something in the process, and that is you have to assess whether something is acceptable and permissible or not. And it's a third party that should decide that. It should normally be a judge. When intelligence service, it depends on who takes the decision, but if you have no control, that is totally unacceptable. Another political problem is the protection of privacy. Normally, we have legal systems in national states that guarantee privacy, but these types of communication are normally more and more international, and there's no world state that can actually protect my right to privacy. So we have a huge lacuna there, because with the exception of the European Convention on Human Rights, we have no international binding agreement that can actually be used in courts that would protect privacy on a world scale. That is one of the examples of the disadvantages of globalization. It's not the only one, but it is one problem. And a third political problem is what we might call the public debate in Europe concerning Echelon. It is so now that no matter what the United States are explaining with respect to what their services do or do not do, then Europeans actually believe that the United States are conducting industrial espionage. There is a lack of confidence, and this will, for example, spread to other areas. You see, when we're talking about the situation of the climate, its effects on the climate, you see the Americans are pushing ahead, and the situation is not improved because we see that the US have an authority that, in fact, so-called the Ocasio Center, which protects American business interests, and it's protected. And in fact, it's also partly responsible for controlling the services, and therefore the services have a representative there. And what we also consider questionable is that there was a hearing in a mentioning of the hearing in the U.S. Congress. It depends on the CIA and the President's decisions whether, in fact, industrial espionage is being conducted or not. There is no legislation, in fact, that bans these kind of services, and our question is, if that is the situation, well, then, dear American friends, if they do it or do not, if they really don't want to do it, if you're assuring us you don't do it, then why not have a law that actually would forbid these kind of services?
Questions?
Mag ik een vraag in het Nederlands stellen?
I'll put forward a question in Dutch. Now, you have shown us how Echelon works, but you've also shown us that there are European institutions that have official tasks when it comes to economic and science information that has to be gathered by these bodies. And in your report, you've also said that French services and others are able to set up some type of network. So I think that in your report, there's no real overview as to what the European intelligence services actually do, and what do they do vis-à-vis counter-espionage. Because on the one hand you've got Echelon, but there's espionage and counter-espionage as well. So why is that overview missing?
Perhaps I can start with the last part of your question. Now, of course, quite obviously, intelligence services tend not to talk about what they're up to, and the same is true of counter-espionage. We have a general idea of what counter-espionage services are doing, and there's a general overview of that in the document, but of course we don't know all the details. As the other part of your question, interception system, such as the UK, USA, and the other states, America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they have this network for interception. What they do is take communications, add a filter, and then look for strategic terms. It's called strategic control of communications. Now, this is a system which is used by the majority of EU states. So it's nothing which is particularly specific to this interception alliance. But the interesting added value is that this interception alliance, which I mentioned to you before, can function globally. You can have a receiving satellite station in Europe, but that of course cannot cover the Pacific states. Another interception station must be posted elsewhere. The interception stations must be placed in a position where they can communicate with the satellites. There's a distinction between what perhaps the German, Italian or Dutch intelligence system does. Those services can only see part of the world, whereas the Interception Alliance can see the whole world. Now, France is somewhat different. France is represented in other parts of the world as well. They have their own territories in far-flung corners of the globe. So in technical terms and in terms of their geographic situation, France would also be able to organise an interception system with global coverage. It would be possible, but we don't actually know whether they do this or not. Through cooperation with Cuba, it would also be possible for Russia to do so as well, just in terms of the technology and the geographical location, whereas other states are not able to act on this kind of global stage, unless, of course, they work in conjunction with partners. Mr. Schmidt, a question in German. 2 questions, in fact, relating to Germany in particular. In your draft resolution point 26, there's a call to Germany and the UK to make further use by the United States of their territory compatible with, and so on and so forth. Now, the Bad Eiling station, we were told, is not part of this interception alliance because it doesn't work in the appropriate technical manner. So why on earth is Germany mentioned then in this draft resolution in these terms? Are there other interception stations over and above at Bad Aibling which might be involved in the Echelon system? Or what is the reason for mentioning Germany? Furthermore, there were particular examples mentioned in your report. Now, with the exception of Mr. Kempel's book, the other publications are all German. Is that because there are no other sources with documentation on particular cases, or was it just because they were not covered in your assessment? Perhaps I can start with your last question. When it came to the books, there are, of course, others. Mr. Dempfer's book, for example, is included. If you take a look at the report, you'll see that. As to the newspaper articles relating to industrial espionage, it is, in fact, the case that they were mainly German reports. We didn't want to provide a comprehensive overview. We simply gave examples, and it was easier for me to provide German examples. It's nothing more complicated than that. Furthermore, we're also looking at documentation of proven cases, but none of these other cases were proven cases. What we wanted to demonstrate was that a lot of ink is spilt on this topic, but that nobody was able to actually prove what the setup was. As to Bad Aibling, I would actually say, and I've said this in the past as well, Bad Aibling cannot have anything to do with interception of Intelsat satellites. And that's actually something which others in Germany have disagreed with. There's a number of reasons for this. First of all, the station will be closed next year. If it were to be necessary for this purpose, it would continue to operate, clearly. Secondly, there are no satellites used for civilian purposes which would be visible from Bad Aibling, which you couldn't see from other sources. Nobody builds a second station just for the fun of it. Other things can be seen there. I have an idea of what they do there, but it doesn't have anything to do with standard civilian communication. That's not what they're intercepting there. Furthermore, if you wish to intercept communications from Intelsat satellites, a lot of the communication is in the so-called C-band. That means the lowest range of frequencies. Now, if you wish to receive C-band communications, you still need to have antennae with a circumference of 50 meters, and the intelligence services use somewhat larger ones because they need top quality sound. They want to have as little background noise as possible, because otherwise the search engines make much too many mistakes. So they take 80-meter antennae, and when Bad Aibling was constructed, they were 30-meter antennae which were stunned. Now, if you go to Bad Aibling and take a look at the station, you can see that they certainly don't have anything of the order of magnitude of 80 meters. Now, why did we write about Bad Aibling nonetheless? It's partly because the rapporteur is German. And it was important for me to deal with this. We've signed the European Convention on Human Rights, and we have to comply with what is law pursuant to the European Court of Human Rights. Now, of course, Germany is also a signatory to this agreement, and we need to look at the way in which information is being treated. The European Convention on Human Rights says that you're not authorised to wriggle out of this problem by saying, well, we're not actually doing this kind of interception ourselves, we're just hosting another satellite. Now, I was convinced that this was not happening in Germany, but I still had to check up to be absolutely 100% certain that this kind of hosting was not going on, Bad Aibling. I mean, if I hadn't mentioned Bad Aibling, then people would have said, oh, well, it's typical, he's a German and he's trying to pull the wool over our eyes on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon.